And now to our coverage of the war between Russia and Ukraine, which also drew a lot of attention at the UN General Assembly. Russian President Vladimir Putin says military reservists are to be sent to Ukraine as part of a partial mobilization of Russian forces. In a televised address to the nation, he said this was a necessary step to ensure the protection of Russia's territorial integrity. We have details in this report.
In his televised address, the Russian leader accused the West of wanting to see Russia weakened and destroyed, and said the threat to retaliate further is not a bluff in any way. He warned that Moscow would defend itself with the might of all its vast arsenal if faced with a nuclear threat from the West. Meanwhile, Western nations have condemned Moscow's plans to hold urgent referendum in parts of Ukraine that are currently under Russian control. The United States, Germany and France have said they would never recognize the results of the votes. Meanwhile, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has taken center stage at the United Nations General Assembly, with Germany and France condemning Russian President Vladimir Putin's imperialism, Qatar, Senegal and Turkey calling for immediate peace talks, and Lithuania urging the establishment of War Crimes Tribunal to punish Moscow's atrocity. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said there was no justification whatsoever for Putin's decision to invade Ukraine in February. Meanwhile, separatist leaders of 4 Russian-controlled areas of Ukraine are insisting on holding referendums on whether to become part of Russia. Those votes, which scheduled to begin as early as this Friday, would take place in the eastern and southern regions of Kherson, Donetsk, Luhansk, and Zaporizhia. The plan for referendum is not going down well with the United States. United States National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan says it's likely Russia is trying to annex parts of Ukraine. He says if the plan materializes, the United States will never recognize the areas as Russian.
As we've been warning for months, Russia appears to be proceeding with plans to hold sham referenda in areas of Ukraine under its control, and even in areas of Ukraine not currently under its control, in direct violation of Ukraine's sovereignty. Russia is rushing to hold these referenda in response to Ukraine's gains on the battlefield, as well as to prepare for potential mobilization measures. These referenda are an affront to the principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity that underpin the international system and that lie at the heart of the United Nations Charter.
The European Union Foreign Affairs Chief also condemns the plot for referendums.
Can you imagine a referendum in the middle of a war in a part of a territory who was military occupied and belongs to another country? Is there any guarantee or whatever for this referendum? No, they are not going to recognize that.
Head or tail, President Putin's resolve to send military reservists to Ukraine is a clear signal that the heat between Russia and Ukraine is yet to die down.
And joining me now to discuss the current developments in the war between Russia and Ukraine is a global affairs analyst, Calvin Dack, and he joins me virtually from the United States. Good to have you join us.
Good to be here.
So, Calvin, I mean, following through this war, the Kremlin has always said that, I mean, its objectives are in place and that it is, everything is going according to plan. And we've always heard that from the Kremlin. So why do you think that President Putin is sending, remobilizing troops? And how strategic do you think that this decision is?
Well, I think this is the first real sign that we've seen that Russia really is getting desperate in this conflict. You know, I'm always skeptical of media reports from my country and around the world that, you know, have painted this as just such a losing battle for Putin, because we're, you know, what, month 7? So, I mean, Putin has held his own, even though he's had setbacks. I think this announcement of this mobilization of troops does represent that they need to do something from their perspective to accomplish their mission. And I think also more importantly, when I often wonder, what do the people in Russia think? We know that the version they're receiving mostly, you know, from media is Putin's version of the special military operation. And they may even support him and believe him. But when they hear this of 300,000 reservists being called, they have to realize that this clearly isn't going the way Putin said it would go or the way he's been describing it for the last 7 months to them.
But does this also indicate that Putin is determined to achieve military victory?
Yes. And one other thing that, his speech from earlier this morning, their time, that what demonstrated to me is, there's been talk, as winter is coming for Europe, that, this would be the time to draw down the conflict. Maybe that's where Putin was leading to. This makes it clear that that's not where he's intending to go. Now, there may be a drawdown, and this may be partially resolved before winter, which I think is what Europe would like. But I think it's clear by this speech and this mobilization, it won't come from Putin or with his cooperation.
Now, when you consider these three major factors, one of them is the fact that the reservists have to be trained. Putin has said that they will be trained before being sent to the field. Those who are already in the field from Russia are considered to be the best hands, and yet Ukraine is reclaiming territories. And then Ukraine is also in a very good place now in the war, where it seems to be reclaiming territories, although we're hearing reports of annexation and referendums within Ukraine. But what impact do you think that this new development of remobilizing about 300,000 reservists have on the war?
Well, I think obviously it's going to give more troops and soldiers. As you mentioned, Russia had already put its best trained soldiers out there. So clearly, even if they train the reservists and the people they're calling up, quickly, they're still not going to probably match the capability of the soldiers that have been there for the last few months. I also think that this will really, really affect morale in the military and in the country, because what can't happen is if Putin does this mobilization, that they continue to lose and do worse, because that will show, lack of his leadership and military strategy. So I think this is going to be a difficult thing. I also don't know if, not that this was a bluff, but I don't know if we should necessarily think that this mobilization is going to happen as he said or as soon as he said.
And I have been listening to military strategists in the past few months on this, who say that, look, beyond just weapons, one of the most important things is also who has more troops on the field. And some military strategists have gone as far as saying it's almost as though Ukraine now has about 2 to 1, so two Ukrainian soldiers, or even 3 sometimes, to 1 Russian soldier. But when you now look at the number of reservists now going to be sent, if Ukrainian soldiers are outnumbered, irrespective of the capacity of the soldiers, doesn't that also tilt the war in favor of Russia?
Yes, and if you take that in a vacuum, I think you're exactly right. Regardless of the level of training, higher numbers on the Russian side would definitely put Ukraine at an advantage. However, I think about this in terms of NATO and European troops. And I know that the United States and NATO countries have shied away from saying we're going to send troops, we're just going to help Ukraine. But if they see that this war is becoming in Putin's favor and that it hinges on the number of troops, I think that's something that NATO and the United States might reconsider.
All right, so we're also hearing about separatists in Ukraine who are set for a referendum on an annexation. President Putin has issued a strong warning concerning this should Western countries interfere. How far do you think he will go to ensure that these countries, and it's quite alarming, because some of these territories rather are not even within a Russian control. For example, some parts of Kherson are not within Russian control, and one wonders, how far do you think Russia would go to ensure that the annexation of these territories?
Oh, I think that he will definitely go as strong as he can in supporting these referenda that we all know are not going to be free and fair for so many reasons. But I don't think that's what Putin's looking for. Putin knows that the U.S. and NATO, European countries, they're never going to accept a referendum that supports him. it helps him in his propaganda, because then the conversation turns from, this military operation war in Ukraine to I'm defending Russians who voted that they wanted to remain or be a part of Russia, depending on whose side of history you look at. So I think for his purposes, it works for his argument.
The UNG is on currently, and it's in New York. I know you are in Washington. The Ukraine war is a major topic in this assembly, the UNG ongoing. But I mean, how do you think they should react to this latest development? What sort of decisions should we be hearing from the UNGA?
Well, I think, it's pretty, expected, as we've already seen, as we'll see when President Biden in a few minutes, gives his speech, and Ukrainian President Zelensky when he gives his speech. We kind of already know the talking points, the celerity and coordination. What I'm looking for is, what will these world powers, Biden and others, say that they will do as part of this united coordination? They're going to condemn it, we know that, but I want to know what's going to happen differently that hasn't already happened in the last 7 months. And, there's going to be a desire that, Putin made this speech earlier today, his time. What's going to be the world response? He made very, strong allusions to nuclear threats. What's going to be the response? I think that's something that Biden and others have to portray, not that they have to talk about using nuclear weapons, but they have to demonstrate that they are not only condemning it, but they're going to coordinate with strategies that will actually work.
And I'm sure that you and I will keep an eye on those speeches being made there, and the decision that the UNG will make in terms of this war and other topics as well. Thank you so much for talking to us, Calvin Dack from Washington.
Thank you.